Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and anybody else that's listening. My name is Pauline Cordiner. I am a storyteller from the northeast of Scotland, and I am delighted to have been asked to do some stories for the World Storytelling Cafe. The first story that I'm going to tell for you is a very special story for me, and I've got something to show you. Now, this might just look like a stick that I've pulled off of any old tree, but it isn't. This is a piece of the great oak tree, Auld Creevy. Auld Creevy grows up an old military road in the northeast of Scotland from the village of Lumfannon. And the storyteller that I learnt it from, Stanley Robertson, he was a traveller, a Scottish traveller, and in his summer months he would go with the family, they would camp up the old road, and he was told the story of Auld Creevy. And that's the first story I'm going to tell you today. Now, many years ago, there was a young laddie whose name was Jack. Now, Jack and his old mother, for the father had died a long time ago, they lived in this horrible, cold little cottage with rain dropping in through the ceiling and the wind blowing under the door. The reason that they were so poor and kept so poor was that they lived on the land of the Auld Laird of the Black Arts. Now, the Auld Laird was the landowner, and it was rumoured that he had been taught black magic, evil magic. And he was a terrible man. He charged so much for rent. And from a very young age, Jack had to go and work for the laird as a shepherd boy. Every morning, he would get the sheep out of their pen and he would take them all the way up the old road. And then he would sit underneath the branches of this great big oak tree, Auld Creevy. It would give him shelter from the sun in summertime and shelter from the rain and the cold in winter. Jack's mother, she did what she could to bring in a few pennies. When the sheep scratched themselves up against the wire fences, she was allowed to go around and pull off the wee wisps of wool, and she would take these, she would spin them, and from that she would knit and make socks and jumpers, or gansies as we say here in the northeast, and she did what she could. But Jack was the main breadwinner. Now, because he had been sitting out underneath this oak tree every day for most of his life, as he grew up from the age of 5, 6, 7, 8, by the time he was 16 years old, he knew another language, and that was the language of the birds. And it was almost Midsummer's Day. It was the day before, and he was sitting under the tree, eating the wee piece, the sandwich that his mother had made for him with a wee bit of cheese and bread, and he could hear the birdies singing. And they were singing a song he hadn't heard before, and they were singing about the dancing trees. And I thought, what are they singing about? And he called out to the birds in their own language and said, "What is it, birds? What's happening?" Well, the birds soon answered to him, "Did you not know, Jack? This is the 50th year. This is the year when the sun sets. The trees will raise themselves up from the ground and they'll go dancing. We're off. It's not good for living things like us birds to be around when that happens." And with that, all the birds stretched out their wings and away they flew. Now, it was getting late in the afternoon, so Jack gathered up all the sheep, took them down and penned them up, and then he went into his mother's house. And he said to his mum, "Mother, what's this I hear for the birds about the trees dancing?" "Oh, Jack," she said, "Kenneth, I mind that story. I telt when I was a young lassie that every 50 years the trees lift themselves up out of the ground and they make their way down to the river, and there they dance together, and it ensures the fertility of the land and the people for another 50 years. But there was another part to it. She said, "My granny, I tell't me that when the trees move, you will see the riches of the earth beneath. but man must not take too much from the earth, or it will take back sixfold in return. Jack was fascinated by this, and he said, I'm going to go up tonight and see what happens. Just then there was a knock on the door, and without even waiting for anyone to answer it, in strolled the Auld Laird of the Black Airs. He was a huge tall man with a great big black beard and a frowning head, frowning face. Good to find the both of yous here, he said. Now, I have friends who are hunting, visiting with me. I don't want to see either of you out of the house tonight. It would be a disgrace to see peasants like you. Stay in tonight, or I'll throw you off my land, he said. And soon he was gone. I'm not paying any attention to him, said Jack. Mother, could you make me a sandwich, a wee piece? I'm going up to see what happens. Well, in the northeast of Scotland, it can get dark after 10, 10:30 at night. So it was quite late when Jack made his way up. Now, Auld Croovy sits on an old dry stone dyke, an old dry stone wall, and Jack sat on that and he waited. And then the sun set, and just when the sun started to go down in beneath the horizon, Jack heard it. It was silent because all the birds had gone. Even the insects, the beasties had gone from the ground and from the trees around him, and then he heard it. Boom, boom. Boom, boom. Boom, boom. Boom, boom. It sounded like a heartbeat, the heartbeat of the earth. And as Jack listened, he started to feel afraid. And he scrambled over the wall and he hid in behind it, and he watched. And in the rays and the slight pinks and oranges of the sky, he could see the shadows of the trees. They were moving. Boom, boom. Boom, boom. Boom, boom. Jack watched in amazement as the biggest tree, Auld Croovy, the grandfather of them all, started to rip its roots out of the ground. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The roots were pulled out one by one, and almost as if they were feet, the tree danced gracefully forward. Once it had reached the path, the tree moved its arms like this. And it was then that Jack saw that the pines and the sycamores and half the other trees then also began to lift their feet out of the earth and dance forward with the music. Boom, boom. Boom, boom. Once they were forward, it was almost as if they turned and they looked towards the birch and the willow, the lady trees. And the lady trees, they too ripped their roots out of the ground and danced forward, and twisting and winding, and they made their way down the hill as the final shafts of light disappeared. Jack was amazed. His heart was beating. He was full of delight. And he sat there in a dwam, and that means he was thinking for a very long time, saying nothing, moving not at all. And soon the moon came out, and with the light of the moon, he could see around him once more, and he got up, and he remembered what his mother had said, the part of the story that her grandmother had told her. And he looked into the pit that Auld Croovy had left behind him, and glinting in the moonlight, he saw stones, precious stones. Diamonds, rubies, sapphires, emeralds, the lot. And his eyes opened wide. But he had too much respect for Auld Croovy to take from his pit. So he climbed over to one of the smaller pits where one of the willows had been, and he hopped in. The first stone that he picked up was a chunk of gold, With that, he said to himself, I could buy my mother out of here. We could get a nice cottage on some other laird's land. Life would be good. And he put it in his pocket. Next, he looked around and he saw a ruby, beautiful and red, like the lips of the girl that he loved, Catherine, the skivvy lassie, the servant that worked for the laird. With this, he said, I could set up a new life for me. I could ask Catherine to marry me. Life would be good. And he put that in his pocket too. And then finally he reached down and he saw another gem, an emerald this time. It was so big and it was so pure he could tell by the light of the moon. With that, he said, I could get a learning. I could be a blacksmith. I could become a teacher. And that went in his pocket as well. And then he stood up. But now he was completely in the darkness and he wondered if the clouds had gone in front of the moon. But it wasn't that. Because when he walked forward into a wall of soil. He reached and felt all around him. He was now down, down, down in a deep, dark pit. He looked up and he could see the moon far, far above him. For each jewel that Jack had taken, he had sunk his own height deep, deep down into the earth 6 times over. As they say, what you take from the earth will take back from you 6-fold. And now he was stuck. He thought of scrabbling at the roots to pull himself up, to climb out, but of course the trees had taken the roots with them. In no time at all, 2 or 3 in the morning, the trees would be returning and he would be trapped. Just then he heard a voice that was music to his ears. Jack! Jack, are you there? Said the voice, and he looked up and he recognised the voice and he saw the silhouetted head of Catherine. Your mother told me you were here. What are you doing down there? No time to lose, he said. I need to get out. Can you find a rope or something? She said, there's nothing here. But I can see the laird's horse just over there. I'll go and see if there's a rope on there. Well, she came back. There was no rope on the laird's horse. Jack wondered, what was the laird doing up there? And he remembered something. Now, before he had left, his mother had handed him what felt like a little ball of wool, and he had shoved it absent-mindedly into his pocket. Now he took that ball of wool out and he teased it out. He saw it wasn't a ball of wool. It was a ladder. A small ladder, true, but one that was long, and he thought, wool will never hold my weight, and he tugged on it. But it was made with his mother's love, and there is nothing in the world that is stronger than that. He realised he could use this to escape. He threw the ball up to Catherine, who was a big, sturdy Scottish lass. She held on to it, and Jack was able to climb out of the pit. It was getting late, or I should say it was getting early now, early in the morning. And when they looked, they could see that the sun was starting to rise in the east. They looked down and they stood together and watched the beautiful sight as the trees finished their dance down in the river below. Where's the laird? He said. I don't know. We must look for him. And they went and they looked into all of the pits, and of course, in the biggest pit of all, Auld Cruvie's pit, there they saw the laird, the greediest man. He hadn't just taken a few stones, no. He had a lantern with him, and they could see him deep, deep, deep down into the earth, shoveling great big handfuls of gold and jewels into a sack. Jack called out to him, Lairdy, Lairdy, stop! You dinna realise what's happening. Without even looking up, the laird cursed at Jack and said, You are not supposed to come out, boy. You and your mother will be made homeless first thing in the morning. Jack said, no, Laird, you must put the jewels back. You are so far down into the earth we cannot save you. But the Laird ignored him and kept shoveling the jewels into the sack. It was too late, because by now the trees had made their way gracefully back up the hill, and they were lowering themselves down into their pits. With one last graceful wave and twist, Auld Creevy froze, and the sound of the beating of the earth, which had continued the whole night, stopped. Boom, 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 boom. Auld Creevy had lowered himself down on top of the Laird. And you know what? He might still be down there, shoveling jewels into his sack in the darkness. Jack got married to Catherine. He became a teacher and opened his very own school. And as for the estate, well, it went to the Laird's nephew, who was a good and kind man. And I suppose, you could say that everybody lived happily ever after. So there's my first story. Now, if you were to come to Aberdeenshire and somebody was to show you Auld Creevy, you'll notice that there is one branch which is stretched out like that, almost as if Auld Creevy is waiting to take someone on a wee dance. You can shake hands with him, and that's the truth. And this is my piece of Auld Creevy that I picked up from underneath the great tree on the day of Stanley's funeral. So there we go. Now, I thought I might sing you a wee song as well. In the northeast of Scotland, we're famous for something called bothy ballads. Back in the day, the farms were huge, absolutely huge, and they needed a large crew of men to work the horses, and they were hired at hiring fairs, and they would stay on the farms either in chammers, which is a word for a room within the farm, or in bothies. Bothies were a wee bit bigger. They would have a wash house for washing the clothes and a fire for cooking food. Now, the evening's entertainment, obviously they didn't have telly or radio or anything else like that, so the evening's entertainment would be playing the fiddle, maybe playing the pipes, and singing. Some of the songs are called corn kisters because the Ora loon, he's the boy that does the odd jobs, would be sat on the corn kist, which is the box full of meal that they would have made their porridge, and he would have stamped his feet in time to the music. That's what my granda told me anyway. Now, this song is from the northeast of Scotland, and it's one of the most famous ones and one of my favourites, and it's called Bogie's Bonnie Bell. A Whitsunday in Huntlayton, it's there I did agree. We bogie here a Kearney for 6 months for te fee. Te drive his twa best horses, likewise his curtain blue, and Teddy Athen about the firm that right will I can do. New Bogie had a doctor, and her name was Isabel. She was the flower o' her nation, and there's none her could excel. She had rosy cheeks and ruby lips, and hair the darkest hue. She was neat, complete, and handsome, aye, and comely for to view. Well, one day she's gaed a ramblin', and she's chose me for her guide, to talk a pleasant walk wi' her, doon by the Kearney side. I slipped my arm about her waist, and it's tae the Grunweed slide. And it was there I had my first braw night wi' the bell o' Bogie's side. Well, the blackbird sang sae sweetly, and the mavis sang sae shrill, and all the chorus o' their song was There lies Bogie's bell among the woods o' Cairney, upon the grassy green. And she and I rose up again for fear we would be seen. Ere 20 weeks were past and gone, that lassie lost her bloom. Her rosy cheeks grew pale and wan, and she began to swoon. Ere 40 weeks were past and gone, that lass brought forth a son, and I was quickly sent for to see what could be done. Old Bogie heard my story, and he cried, I am undone. Since you've beguiled my doctor, my sorrows are begun. So I said, old man, you're fairly right, and I'll hang my head in shame. But I'll marry Bell the morn, and I'll gie the bairn my name. But although I said I'd wed the lass, none of that wouldna dee. You're no a fitting match for Bell, and she's nae match for ye. And he sent my packing down the road, wi' nae penny o' my fee. So it's a' you lads o' Huntly Town, a warm farewell fae me. Well, noo she's married to a tinkler lad, his name it's Suitor John, and she hawks his pans and ladles around the foggy lawn. Well, maybe she's gotten a better match, old Bogie canna tell. But it was me that had the first braw night wi' Bogie's bonny bell. There you go. I hope you liked that one. The Bothy ballads were generally about life on the farm. We're a great crew. He's a good employer. He's a bad employer. His wife makes terrible porridge. Oh, his daughter's beautiful. Those are the typical themes. There's even one about a drunken pig. Maybe I'll do one of them in another session. Now, I'm going to tell you another story now. This is another Scottish folktale. It's probably Viking in origin. There's a great long serpent in it known as the Mester Stoorworm, which reflects back to the Midgard serpent, which the Vikings believed wrapped itself around the earth so big that it could go all the way around the earth and put its tail in its mouth. So long ago, in the north part of Scotland, there lived a young boy whose name was Ashiepattle. Now, I expect that there's not many Ashiepattles out in the world. If there are, I'd love to hear from you. It was his nickname. Ashiepattle basically means the lad that hangs around the fire and gets covered in ash, because that was all that he did. Well, he had 7 older brothers who were off working on the farms, or maybe they had jobs as fishermen. Ashiepattle would sit around the fire from dawn until dusk. Sometimes, occasionally, he would get outside to get a bit of fresh air and then clouds of stour, the clouds of ash would cloud round him. And every time his brothers went past him, they would give him a wee kick and say, "See you, Ashipattle, you'll never amount to anything." And that was him. Now, one day, the king of that kingdom, because this is back in the days when all the countries were split up into tiny little kingdoms, he had a castle which overlooked the ocean. He looked all the way up into the North Sea, and he opened the shutters in the castle and he looked out, and although he knew it was daytime, it was as dark could be. Something was casting a great shadow over the land. And he looked up to where he thought the sun should be. And he looked, and he looked, and his jaw dropped open. Because there, coming out of the water, was the neck and head of this gigantic serpent, the biggest beast you can possibly imagine. Its eyes were the size of the biggest lochs. Its nostrils were the size of deep, dark caves, but that was nothing compared to the size of its mouth, this huge maw which opened up with sharp teeth. Immediately he ran and he got his spaewife. Now, a spaewife is the wise woman. And he dragged her to a window and he pointed frantically and said, "What is that?" And she said, "It can only be the Mester Stoorworm. It's a terrible beast. If it does not get what it wants, it will breathe great big clouds of poison all across the land. It will kill the people, it will kill the animals, it will kill the insects in the soil, the birds in the trees. It'll kill the trees, the plants, the crops, even the lichen on the rocks, and nothing will grow upon the land for 100 years. "Well, we must give it what it wants so it will go away," said the king. "What does it want?" The lady said, "See how it opens its mouth. See how it is yawning. It's not yawning because it's tired. It's yawning because it is hungry. It wants to be fed." "Well, then we will feed it," said the king. "What shall we feed it? How many cows? How many oxen? How many boar?" She said, "No. It needs to be the tastiest food. It needs to be young girls, maidens." The king was horrified, but faced with the choice of everything in his land dying and nothing growing for 100 years, everyone dying, or a few girls, the choice was obvious. So from then on, every 7 days, they would take these young lassies, they would strap them to a rock down on the beach, down below the cliffs, below the castle, and the huge beast would first of all raise itself out of the water. You could see its eyes, then its nose, then the huge great big mouth as it rose out of the ocean, and then it would come down and its great tongue would slither and slide out of its mouth before sucking up one of the girls, swallowing her down. 7 girls every week. It did not go away. Weeks passed, and Ashipattle's brothers were starting to get worried that there would be nobody left for them to marry. "What are we going to do about this? What's the king going to do? I could beat that monster," said Ashipattle. You know nothing. You will never amount to anything." "Okay," he said, "just call me a brave knight with my sword and my steed." "You can't even ride a horse," said the brothers, and they would kick him and get on with their work. The king was getting desperate. He went to see the spaewife again. "What can I do?" she said. "There is only one thing that I can think of. You must feed this beast the tastiest morsel in the whole of the kingdom." And within his heart, the king knew exactly what she meant. His own daughter, Jem the Lovely. It would have to be her. The spaewife agreed. The king did not want to lose his daughter. He loved her more than anything. And it seemed that that was the only choice. And he said to the spaewife, wait, give me 1 week. And he sent out men on horseback. He sent out the women round the coast to get to the coastal villages. And once they got there, notices were nailed to trees. Proclamations were made with hunting horns announcing the presence of the envoys. People were being asked if they had the courage to come and fight the Mester Stoorworm. Anyone who successfully did would not only be given half the kingdom and the king's sword, said to have once belonged to Odin himself, Seeker Snapper, but they would be given the Princess Jem de Lovely's hand in marriage. Within the week, 36 knights had turned up at the king's castle. The day before the princess was due to be fed to the monster, the first 12 knights peeked over the battlements, saw this huge thing down in the water with its great eyes looking and blinking at them, and they screamed, "Mummy!" and away they ran. The next 12 made it to the top of the cliff, where the steps were cut into the stone that made its way down to the beach, where the princess would be tied to the rock. By this point, the beast had raised itself up to its nose, and they saw the long snout and the great big gigantic nostrils as it breathed in. They could hear it, they could smell it, and they too went, "Mummy!" and they ran for their lives. The final 12, poked and prodded possibly in the buttocks by the king's men with swords, they made it down onto the beach before finally this huge creature brought its big face up, and it opened its mouth. They dropped dead from the shock, and so the king was left with despair in his heart. "Go ready my boat," he said to his men. "I would sooner die than have my daughter eaten, knowing that I hadn't tried." That night the brothers and Ashipattl's mother and father sat round the fire discussing what had happened with the knights. "It seems that our good princess is lost," said the brothers. Ashipattle stayed silent, but that night, when he knew that everybody was asleep, he crept downstairs. He got to the stable, he got onto his mother and father's horse, and he rode it with great speed across the land until he came to the castle. Leaving the horse at the top of the stairs, he went down the stone steps that had been cut into the cliffside, and he made his way to the house of an old lady who lived on the beach. He opened the door. She was sound asleep, but she had left her fire the way that most people would have left their fire in those days. You see, not only was it very difficult to light a fresh fire every morning from scratch, but it was also seen as bad luck. So what the people would do is they would put big lumps of peat on the fire. They smoulder, they burn slowly, and it was these peats slowly burning that Ashipattle scooped up with a shovel and emptied into the lady's cauldron. He then left her house and approached the king's boat. A soldier was there, guarding the boat. "Hello," said Ashipattle. "Hello," said the soldier. "What are you doing?" "Looking after the king's boat. Tomorrow he will try to save the princess." "Ah, you must be freezing. Do you want to come on here we warm up my fire?" "No," said the soldier. "I am on duty." "All right," he said. "I'll just make a wee fire on the beach. Come over if you want." He scrabbled around in the shingle on the beach as if he was going to be making a wee fire with some of the firewood he'd collected. And then he suddenly started crying. "Oh my goodness, look at this. I'm going to be rich. This is gold. I've found gold." And as soon as he'd said that, the soldier dropped his spear, came running off the boat, and came and joined Ashipattle in scrabbling along and amongst the stones, because a wee bit of gold is an awful lot more appealing than doing your duty. Or it was to the soldier anyway. As quick as anything, Ashiepattle grabbed the cauldron, ran onto the boat and weighed anchor and started rowing the giant oars out to sea. By this point, the sun was rising and the king had been making his way all the way across to the top of the stone steps. The Princess Gem de Luffy was kissed and cuddled by her father, and then they went down the steps where she was tied to that giant flat rock. The king looked to see his boat and saw that it was halfway out to sea. He was not impressed. Some wee Ned had nicked his boat. Here was his last chance of saving his daughter, and he could only stand and watch with his mouth agape as Ashiepattle disappeared with his boat. Hope was lost. By now there were huge crowds lining along the cliffs, everybody hoping that something could be done so that they wouldn't see their princess eaten by this huge beast. But the beast was already rising out of the water. First its eyes, then its nose, then the huge mouth as it twisted its neck and looked at the princess. Then, with one giant opening of its mouth and one huge great big yawn, Ashiepattle in the king's boat, and all the water was sucked into the monster's mouth and straight down into the depths of his belly. If the king had had any slight glimmer of hope that this young boy would save the princess, that glimmer of hope was now doused. Ashiepattle, meanwhile, found himself into the belly of the great serpent. And I don't know if we have any marine biologists out there that specialise in sea serpent bodies. However, he found himself in a gigantic tunnel which seemed to be glowing with some sort of unearthly luminescent light. And all the way down the tunnel there were wee other tunnels coming off here, there and everywhere, and eventually the boat ground to a halt on a shore of sorts within the beast's belly, and Ashiepattle got out. And he ran around until he found what he was looking for. Down one deep dark tunnel, he found the monster's liver. He took his father's knife out of his boot and he cut a huge slice into the liver. Then, lifting the cauldron, he shook it until the burning peats fell inside. And then he blew, and he blew, and he blew, until he was blue in the face. And the first flames started to flicker as the oil within the beast's liver started to burn. Quick as anything, Ashiepattle turned. He dropped the cauldron and he ran for his life. He ran and he ran until he got back to that boat, and he pushed that boat out into the liquid within the creature's stomach, and he held on tight. Meanwhile, above, people were starting to cry. The king was hanging his head until a soldier said, Your Majesty, I don't think it's done that before, has it? And the king looked, and everybody else looked, and the beast was swaying slightly from side to side, and now smoke was coming out of its nose, and even out of its ears. And then it opened its mouth, and black, thick black smoke was billowing out of there as well. And then it seemed to suck in the greatest breath, and it coughed. It coughed up some of the smoke. And it continued to cough, but with that first great cough, out of the mouth came, sliding, skittering, bouncing across the surface of the water in the boat, was Ashiepattle. The boat came to a halt close to where the princess was tied up. Ashiepattle leapt out into the water, waded through it, and he set her free, and the king called down, "Don't do that! What will the monster do when it sees you have taken his breakfast?" Ashiepattle looked at the princess, she looked at him, and he said, I wouldn't be worrying about that now, your majesty. You're right, queen, he said to the princess. Yes, she said, thank you. Meanwhile, everybody was watching the monster. It was clear now that something was wrong. This beast was in pain. This huge, gigantic serpent was rising more and more of its great long body out of the water, all the way up, up, up into the sky, and it was writhing in pain and agony. It started to thrash in the water this way, that way. It smashed all the way across the land, across the North Sea and across Europe, causing such an indentation in the land that when it rose back up again, water filled it, and that became the Baltic Sea. It lifted itself back up again. It writhed some more, and some teeth came exploding, bursting out of its mouth. 1, 2, 3 sets of teeth went flying. The first became the Orkney Isles, just to the north of Scotland. The second, the Shetland Isles, and further away still, those teeth became the Faroe Islands. But everybody watched in amazement as the whole creature wound and twisted in agony, yelling and roaring up into the sky, and it lifted itself further and further away from them. And eventually it crashed down into the sea many hundreds of miles to the north with a huge splash causing tidal waves. That beast still lies there today. It's still burning from the inside, for that is Iceland. And now you know where all those things came from. And as for Ashiepattle, he married the princess. And he got half the kingdom, and he got the sword, Sickersnapper. Not that he ever needed it, because if you remember, Ashiepattle was very good at stories. He loved to tell stories. And there's nothing a country needs better in trying times than a leader who's good at telling a tale or two. And that is the story of Ashiepattle and the Mester Stoorworm. Now, I'm recording this on my phone, and I'm getting some messages that I might be running out of capacity to record more. So I will say thank you very much for listening to me here. I'm Pauline Cordiner, and I've been telling stories for World Storytelling Cafe. Please tune in later tonight when you will hear the wonderful Baden Prince. And I just want to say thank you very much to John Rowe and everybody at the World Storytelling Cafe for having me along. I'm going to finish on a nice wee tune. This is a song that was sung by some of the fishwives up in the northeast of Scotland, and it's called The Fisherman's Lassie. Oh, the fisherman's a bonny, bonny lad, I've never seen onything bolder. He wears his sea beats o'er his knees and his straps across his shoulders. I'm a rambling, tumbling fal-de-do-a-day, I'm a rambling, tumbling lassie. I'm a rambling, tumbling fal-de-do-a-day, and they call me the fisherman's lassie. New my Johnny, he's a fisherman fine. He brings in cran o' herring, and soon he will be coming home to me, and where love will soon be sharing. I'm a rambling, tumbling fal-de-do-a-day, I'm a rambling, tumbling lassie. I'm a rambling, tumbling fal-de-do-a-day, and they call me the fisherman's lassie. Now I'll dress myself up in my Sunday best, I'll make myself look a bonny, and I'll gang a wadding to the harbour side for to see my handsome Johnny. I'm a rambling, tumbling fal-de-do-a-day, I'm a rambling, tumbling lassie. I'm a rambling, tumbling fal-de-do-a-day, and they call me the fisherman's lassie. I hope you like that. hopefully I'll be back again soon with some more stories. And in the meantime, nice to have spoken to you all. Cheerio!